On location in Prince George, and today's guest is Neil. Is it Godbout?
It's Godbout.
Godbout. You know, that's what I said last time. Neil Godbout, it's great to have you on.
Thanks.
And we've got a lot to talk about. Neil has quite the resume. We're going to find out all about it. But we're going to start with the Chamber of Commerce because that's initially how I met you. And so you just this January stepped into the role of, is it executive director or CEO?
It's executive director. So I actually started in March of 2024. I was covering mat leave, Quinlan Young's mat leave. And then in October, she resigned the position. She wanted to spend more time with her young family. And so worked out an arrangement with the board to stay on as permanent. And we did that in December. And so here I am.
Perfect.
You're stuck with me.
Yeah, it's stuck with you, I guess, now until you find something else, because you seem to do a lot of things. I know right now you just stepped into a role with the Community Arts Council. I do want to talk about the Chamber a little bit more before we do that, but let's just quickly talk about the Arts Council, because I know you were just in here yesterday, and it's actually this building where we're shooting this podcast out of. Is part of the Arts Council, I guess, the digital portion of that.
Right.
So what are you kind of doing now? Because this is a new role for you that you just got.
So I attended my first meeting yesterday of the Prince George and District Community Arts Council. I was brought on the board just because of now I'm representing 530 of our members. That's how big our chamber is in terms of of the number of businesses that belong to the chamber, and one of those members is the Arts Council, and of course you're also a member too with your company. So it's so the chamber actually has more than 40 not-for-profits that are members of the chamber, and so I've been wanting to really trying to work with more of the not-profits to connect them with the other for-profit, the small businesses, but also large ones, to connect them. But then also to use my role with the chamber to work more closely with arts groups. And of course, the Arts Council has some very ambitious plans to redevelop this site at Studio 2880, and I thought, sign me up. That's where I want to be. There's some exciting things that they hope to land over the next 2-3 years, and that sounds like work I'd like to do.
Nice. I got invited to one of those meetings, and I got to sit in and talk with the engineers that were kind of talking about what this potentially could be. And for myself, being asked kind of like, what would you do? It was like really, really exciting. Hearing the engineers kind of talk about the space and then take you seriously as well. That, if you wanted to do lighting, you'd probably want to run some pipe here and there and all that kind of stuff. It was really exciting to kind of get input from people who were listening. Now, for you, I imagine you're a lot deeper into it than just the membership, like myself who was there. Is there anything you can talk about, like as far as planning goes?
There has been a feasibility study that has been put together on what that could look like in terms of the redevelopment of this project. And of course, this is City of Prince George property. So, there has to be some pretty close coordination with the city. And certainly there'll be a need for some support from the provincial and probably federal level as well in terms of capital funding for that. But I don't want to get I know enough from my own board experience that usually the executive director or the chair of the board speaks on behalf of the board. So I don't want to get into that stuff a little too much. That's certainly the rule at the chamber anyway. Yeah. So I don't want to get into that too much. But it's pretty exciting what they've got planned. I can't wait to be a part of it.
Yeah. Well, you've had the role now for how long? 2-3 weeks?
So yeah. Like I said, my first meeting last night. So
yeah. No, it's exciting. I mean, like I said, like this whole space is only possible because of that, the city putting everything together and people coming together to make it.
And I've been involved in terms of the arts north, like particularly the digital space, with the filming and especially the audio piece in terms of the recording for podcasts, is that right? That was
Yeah.
Michael Cast.
Yeah.
That was involved in that right from the beginning. And Michael wanted to, and of course this was during the heart of COVID, and Michael's wanted, hey, we need to, I want to start kind of using this equipment so that then if I learn how to do it, he can then show others to do it. Neil, would you come do a podcast with me?
Yeah.
So we still do that podcast to this day. It's
Yeah.
called Everything Everything. And because of its title, we just talk about whatever we feel like talking about. We record probably about once every 2 to 3 weeks. We went on hiatus for about a year and a half over 2023, but we recently brought it back. And yeah, so it was funny because Lisa Redpath, one of the staff here, was showing Terry McConaughey some of the improvements that have been made around here, and was showing Terry the studio, and referred to me as one of the OGs.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
Is that right? I was in this space when actually everyone was told to stay home. Is
Yeah.
that Michael and I were, seated 8 feet apart, and this was even before masks were, so right, there was no masks. We were like, okay, how do we do this? Well, how about we just kind of sit right at a long table apart? And we had Michael brought me my own mic cover, which I would put on and then take home, and then next episode, okay, put it back on, because we didn't know what we didn't know, right? So
Yeah.
and we just started that. We would come in, and it was often in the evenings. I remember. I have very good memories of that, because I had never done anything like that, and didn't really know what I was getting into. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is. And, funny thing about that room over there, the podcast studio, when I started working with the group here, I was just looking for a small space like this, like 12 by 12, that I could come in and have an interview like this. And it was for this Tell Us Story Hive project. And we were looking at an area just around the corner. And I remember Christina and Lisa. You would know Christina.
Yeah, Christina Watts. Yeah.
Yeah. So the two of them were kind of showing me around, and they showed me the podcast area. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a membership just to use that. Because for a business, for myself, it was $75 a year. And then I could book the podcast studio, have 4 people in there recording whatever I wanted. And I said, that's what I'm going to do. And that was, I guess, about a year and a half ago, maybe pushing 2 years ago. And then they showed me the room that it was supposed to be in, and the ceiling was falling down. They had that water damage in there.
Yeah.
And they said, this is supposed to be the podcast studio, but it's just ruined now. And
That's where Michael and I were first recorded some of our episodes
Right,
before
so-
that happened.
so it was there first, and
Yeah.
then it got moved out because of the damage.
Yeah.
So then
Because
over.
it felt like we were recording in a closet.
Yeah.
And of course it's COVID, so we were both a little paranoid, right, about the whole thing, and okay, we're making sure that we're doing the social distancing and that stuff, and
Yeah. So, and then that room, because it was all falling down, it was just kind of left for a while until the city came and repaired it. But after they did repair it, Christina and Lisa asked me, like, what should we do for the acoustic treatment, because we had these panels on the wall. And so I said, can I do it? Because I had this idea in my head to go 45 degrees with the panels and change up the look of them, the style. And they said, go ahead. They said, go ahead, do whatever you want in there. So they actually let me wrap that place in the acoustic foam in the layout that it is right now. And I've got
Nice.
video. Yeah, I created a video of me sticking the pieces up and measuring everything and laying it all out. And it was a lot of fun. And the funny thing about that was I only did that for myself, right? I did it because I wanted to record a podcast in that room that looked cool behind me. I still haven't done that 2 years or a year and a half later. I still haven't recorded a podcast in there.
right.
Because right after that happened, they said, you should come over and see this other room. And they brought me in here. And this was full of art supplies, and there was paper on the floor, and there was like finger painting and stuff. And they said, what would you do in here? And so again, got crazy with paper diagrams and everything. I drew everything out and I handed it to them. I said, this is what you should do.
That's awesome.
And a week later, they cleared it out. They moved everything into the other building, and they said, fly at her. And wow.
And this is what happens when you work with creative people, and then there's also people who are used to working with creative people, and what can we do to help you be successful as creative people? And of course, that's what Lisa and the Arts Council staff do, right? We're here to help you be successful as creative people. We have an idea. What do you think of this space? Away you go.
I was not expecting that. I'll be honest. I was expecting an area, this big, to just kind of hang a backdrop and be done with it. And when they opened this area up, I thought, we need to do something big in here. And so that's why there's a green screen over here. That's why there's a big photography area. That's why there's backdrop support, so you can pull new backdrops down on chain. It's because, for myself, I just wanted it to have potential. And, Lisa, Christina, Ellie, they wanted it to have potential as well. And there was kind of a level of, this guy kind of knows what he's doing, or he sounds like he knows what he's doing. I might have faked it a little bit, I'll be honest. I let them know what was potentially true.
Fake it till you make it is the mantra, not just in the arts world. It's right. I deal with owner operator of small businesses and entrepreneurs. Fake it till you make it applies in the business world and in the professional world as well. So you're in good company.
Nice. Yeah. It was certainly a fun process. But going back to the chamber, because I just recently became a chamber member, and I had no idea that the chamber had the type of benefits that it did. And I don't mean benefits just like, insurance rates and stuff like that. I mean things like the mayor's breakfast, stuff like that, like networking events where you can sit down with people that have prominent positions in the city and toss ideas back and forth and hear their ideas and listen to them talk about kind of the future of Prince George and stuff.
But more importantly, they want to hear from people like you, right? They want to hear from, new business owners, entrepreneurs. They want to hear their ideas. They want to, because they feed off your energy, but also they recognize, in particular for the elected officials, is that they recognize that when you prosper, that's good for the economy, that's good for the community, it's good for them, right? And they often come into it with, how can I help? But it's also, right, they also want to hear about your challenges, because then they can, if they know what the problems are, then they can work to address them, whether there's administrative red tape, like whatever that looks like. So it's a two-way conversation for sure. So I'm glad that you've seen that benefit, because certainly that's the value proposition we tell our members is, yes, you're paying hundreds of dollars for a chamber membership, but we hope we're giving you something in return.
It definitely is, yeah, for sure. I'm going to be going to the AGM here coming up, so I'm looking forward to
Excellent.
that. And I noticed it's hosted at the Exploration Place.
Yep.
So.
And then in May we're going to have the chief economist from the Business Development Bank of Canada will be coming in and just kind of talking about, and of course lots to talk about with everything that's happening in the provincial and national and global economy right now with global trade war and all of that stuff. And then the following week we'll have the brand new president of ICBC, who's going to come. And of course, for all of us who drive vehicles and pay insurance and stuff, we tend to care very much about what our rates are and what's deductible and not deductible and all of that stuff. So it's I would say for businesses especially that have operate fleets, you probably have questions, and so we're going to present that opportunity where the president can speak to that and maybe provide some answers.
Can you talk about any of those
Sure.
talks? I haven't been to any yet, so I don't really know what to
Yeah,
expect.
it's really, and we have them at breakfast time, because it's people kind of right at the beginning of the day, and the presenter usually speaks for about half an hour or so, and then it's really just open to questions. And of course, like you said, the networking opportunity in terms of who else is in the room, and people are out by 9:30 and right, you're on to your day. And we found that the breakfasts are really the best way to engage our members and present them with speakers that have some pretty valuable information that they should know.
Yeah, and then they can just finish up breakfast and
Yeah.
head right back to work.
Exactly.
Yeah, nice. So before you started at the chamber, well, before we go into that, you had a different role with the chamber first, before stepping into the CEO role. What was that role? You were,
I didn't really have a role before. Like I said, I was hired in March of 24 to cover the mat leave, but I never really had a direct connection with the chamber. I knew what chambers did, and I didn't know, I'd been introduced to Quinn, so I wouldn't say I knew her on a first name basis, but I certainly knew who she was, and I was certainly on a first name basis with the previous, we used to call them CEOs. I actually asked to go back to the more common job title for the senior staff person in chambers, which is executive director. I knew Todd Corrigal, who was the CEO of the chamber before COVID and during COVID. I knew Todd definitely on a first name basis. We would probably meet and just talk about things a couple times a year. So I definitely knew what I was getting into.
okay.
When I went down this road, but of course there's a difference between knowing and experiencing, and it's been a pretty crazy year and a bit now of learning everything that's going on and trying to support the businesses, but then also just the social and political and cultural space I work in. And of course there's a BC chamber, there's a Canadian chamber, so what's that look like in a provincial and national context?
Oh, yeah. So how, aside from those breakfasts and stuff like that, how else does the chamber support business?
Certainly the events, and why our chamber believes so much in events is really it's about bringing people together and the members together. But we, as you say, we certainly do different things. We BC, the Women's Entrepreneurial Society of BC, engaged our chamber in terms of a mentorship program. So we just finished that. They've asked us to do it again for this year, so we'll pick that up again in the fall. And sometimes it's even both the breakfasts in May that I mentioned, the BBC Economist and ICBC. Those are those organizations coming to us saying, we want to talk to your members. Can you put something together? And they'll provide us with some support money, and away we go. The other breakfasts that we do, still with events, so we have a leadership breakfast series. I think that's the one you're talking about with, we do one every year with, so it's sort of a mayor's state of the city, if you want to address, but it's, we do one every year with the mayor, one every year with the MLAs. We get an update from them. One with the MPs, haven't been able to book that one yet because we're in an election cycle, but once we're on the other side of that, I'll book something with the MPs. And then the fourth one we leave a little bit open. We'll know by tomorrow who the new, or if it will remain the current chief of the Claytley Tenay, so we'll probably reserve the spot for that. TC Energy sponsors that, so it's a way for sometimes the larger businesses to support the chamber and help the chamber out. So that's just, and I haven't even mentioned, like we're doing a business development forum in early May, True North, where we'll have the president of BC Hydro and some other speakers there just talking about the regional economic activity and things going on. And then we do the Business Excellence Awards, which of course you've been involved with, and we'll be involved with again this year. We're doing that in November.
Yeah.
That's just the events, right? And then, then the other piece we really try and do for focus on with membership is the advocacy. And that's in terms of advocating for pro-business things, whether it's with our local government, regional government, and then working with the BC Chamber, the provincial government, and the Canadian Chamber on the national level, is really advocating for things that frankly help it help make small businesses and, well, businesses of all size more successful. And so whether that's on the housing front or and sometimes there's partnerships to be had there. I mean, housing is, we would work with the Home Builders Association. And so there's, and I would say that advocacy then does have that partnership. Is like, who can we work with to advocate for different things? The North Central Local Government Association meeting is next month in Prince Rupert. So the City of Prince George is bringing some resolutions, policy recommendations that would go on to the provincial government around improved conservation officer service. They're also bringing a recommendation around a secure psychiatric, safe psychiatric care facility in Prince George. Well, when I found out what the city was working on with that, it was like, as a chamber, though both of those things would be good for business. And some people might think, well, geez, why would improving the conservation officer service be good for business? Well, it's, I would argue, great for business, whether it's from ecotourism operators, but also just people going out in the backcountry, whether it's just regular users. But I mean, it even applies to businesses, and we certainly see this in here in Prince George, is businesses that their operation backs onto forested areas. And so we want to keep those businesses secure. We want to keep those employees safe. If they're showing up at 5 a.m., right, is they want to know, oh, hey, there's a bear. They want to be able to pick up the phone and get a conservation officer on the phone who can come out and help them with that. So, so really, so we're bringing our own resolution to the BC Chamber AGM this year, so that when government receives these policy recommendations, they'll go, oh, the City of Prince George is, so local government is recommending improved conservation officer service, and so is the business community. Maybe we should look at that. So those are the kinds of partnerships, but also that's the kind of social and political advocacy that the Chamber tries to do.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of those decisions that they make, I know you get a lot of pushback from it too, because people just don't understand what the two have to do with each other. One, I know you don't have any part of this, but wildlife conservation and hunting, and you know, you would kind of think it's counterproductive that buying a hunting tag for a moose or something is actually good for the environment, but people just don't realize that, well, when you buy that, those funds go into the conservation for the animals. It helps protect
100%.
Yeah, streams and rivers.
Well, and the fact that we have hunting supply stores, right? The Canadian Tire has a whole hunting supply section, right? Is that there's economic activity there, and that's certainly, of course, what we're encouraging at the Chamber, but then encouraging government to encourage that activity more, or at least not discourage it, meaning stop getting in the way of that activity and that economic growth.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you a question you probably don't have an answer for, and how come whenever decisions are made, they always tell you what they're gonna do, but they never say why, right? There's always some kind of like, oh, the government's going to increase a tax here, and you know, but they don't say, well, we're going to increase property tax so that we can put in a new water main and we can do snow removal for, you know, an extra month, because
sometimes they do.
Maybe I'm looking at the wrong content or something, but I need to read the right stuff. But yeah, that's one of the things that I'm always asking. Like I always have to ask somebody like, okay, that's great, whether I agree with it or not. But I'll always want to know why. I'm a why guy. That's one of the things I always like to know.
The City of Prince George right now is having, well, the process is actually controversial in itself, and I won't bore you with all the details of why it is, but the City of Prince George is actually planning to borrow some money right now to replace some infrastructure equipment. But it's a multi-million-dollar expenditure, and under the local government rules, they do have to, instead of having to have a referendum where we would vote on it, And we've had to do that here in the city of Prince George. We did that for the new fire hall and the new pool, right? Is that as citizens, we could go and say, yes, we approve spending this amount of money for those facilities or not. There's a secondary process where it's open for a month that people can give the city feedback, and if enough people say, well, we'd really like to have a referendum, then it goes to referendum. But anyway, so that's one where the city is saying we're planning on borrowing this money from the municipal financing authority to do this, spend on these things. And local residents, if you care about this, then now you know.
Yeah.
It's one of those things. So there is connection a lot of times to that kind of work by our local government, certainly, and that's the level of government, of course, that we're all closest to, is the work that's approved by our elected mayors and councils.
Yeah, yeah, it's really exciting that this building is going to get replaced and looking to be replaced, because it's going to be totally new, right? It's going to be like high-tech, modern. It's going to be kind of all the new amenities. And the fact that they're bringing the membership in to get involved in kind of the design phase of it's really interesting as well, because everybody that has so many ideas, right down to, you know what, there should be a front lobby and there should be like a coffee shop in there so that, you know, when you're meeting somebody, you can kind of sit down there on some benches and have a latte. And, you know, they get right into it, and they kind of want to make it like homey and cozy and comfortable, right? And I think that kind of stuff is what draws people in, draws the community in. So it could be just an art gallery, or it could be kind of like a place where people come and kind of hang out a little bit too, and then get exposed to art, right?
Arts facilities are community centers. That's certainly the way I see them, is that they are people that come from different backgrounds. We certainly, and have different interests. We certainly see that here at this facility in terms of, right, there's potters, there's wood turners, there's visual artists, there's, you know, people like yourself that you know, that do photography and video work. And so there's lots of different forms of artistic expression. And then there's the people who just enjoy that work. Or want to dabble in it, or want to learn more about it, or just would like to come in and buy it, or talk to artists. And that's where, I mean, a facility like this is so important. Certainly even for live theater or live music, right? It's, again, those are community centers. It's bringing people together. And that's where I see my work at the Chamber as being very much in sync with that, because I look at the Chamber's work as community building as well, because when the business community works on community building, that's good for business. And then what's good for business is good for the community, and right, and you get this very positive feedback, and then everyone benefits.
Yeah, that was one thing interesting about joining the Chamber. And it was funny because I became a member because you wanted to hire me to do a project.
Yeah.
And I laugh about it because it's like, did he really want me to do this project, or did he just want me to become a member? It's just kind of a joke.
And two things can be true at the same time. I
True,
mean,
true.
The answer was yes.
Yeah.
I wanted you as a member.
Yeah.
And I also wanted you for the project.
Yeah, and I'm so glad I became a member, because like you talk about all the offerings that the Chamber offers, I haven't even taken advantage of the newsletter stuff that goes out. Like, I haven't written anything for my business yet, but the networking that happens within the Chamber and events, that in itself is what's most valuable to me.
And you're identifying something that we often tell to our members, especially when they get their annual renewal for their dues, for their annual dues.
Yeah.
Well, what does the Chamber do for me? Well, being a Chamber member is there's a part of it is, well, are you taking part, right? What are you putting into your membership? It's like having a gym membership. Yeah, right? If you just buy your gym membership and don't show up to the gym, well, right, you've got to put in some effort, and that's really what we tell the business owner operators who sign up for a chamber membership, is that if you put some time in, if you come out to the events, if you network, you're going to learn some things, you're going to meet some different people, and those things that you're going to take away will be good for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a business like mine, thrives on word of mouth.
100%.
It's completely referral based, the work that I do, right? And kind of every other day there's somebody else contacting you to ask you or inquire about something. And so yeah, that networking is key for a lot of businesses, especially a business like mine. But let's talk about a little bit before the chamber, because I know you worked for the Citizen and you were an editor at the Citizen. And
So I'm a recovering journalist.
what does that mean, recovering journalist?
I was a journalist for 35 years.
Wow.
So, right, that's what I wanted to do coming out of high school. I graduated from the journalism program at Carleton University in Ottawa in 1990, and so, yeah, I was a journalist from the mid 80s until I guess March of 2024. So it was, yeah, coming on to 40 years that
Wow.
I had been. Well, I started doing it as a high school senior. I was writing the high school news column for my local newspaper in Lake Country, and and I caught the bug, and I went off to journalism school, and then I worked as a reporter and editor in Penticton and Kelowna and Salmon Arm, and kept creeping north, and ended up in Prince George, and so it's. This became home, and so yeah, I was at the Citizen in 2 different stints for almost 25 years.
Oh yeah. And so that you leaving there, was that to do with just changing times? And
Of course, I you know, the news media landscape has changed a lot, especially for
Mhm.
newspapers, and but it was also, I think, even if the Citizen was still if it was still a 6-day-a-week daily newspaper like it was when I first joined the Citizen, and for most of the time that I was the editor of the Citizen, it was a daily newspaper. Even if it was still that, and was you know, a multi-million-dollar a year business, even if it was still in that space, I probably would have been looking to make a transition. I know in about 2022, I was writing an editorial one day, and I was like, have I written this before? and I've and at that point I had been editor for about 10 years, and I've always reminded myself when I was a journalist that, especially for editors, that there's a bit of a shelf life. Right, that you're expressing opinions and editorial views, and at some point it would be good for the community, and certainly good for the publication and the ownership, to hear someone else representing the newspaper in terms of the editorial views and the opinions, and just someone who has a different mindset in terms of even working with the reporters of which stories to cover. You can't cover all the stories.
Mhm.
So, right, a different editor has a different perspective about that. So that's when I really started, you know, I think it might be time to look for something else, but I was definitely wanting to be doing something in the space of where I felt I was working for the community, and that's certainly how I felt when I was editor of the Citizen, and that's how I feel now working with the Chamber.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking too, was you were moving from another huge community base to another community base, just kind of in a different way now.
Yeah.
And you're still representing the community like you did before.
Yeah, and that's what I love about it. I mean, the thing that I love even more about it now is that the job of editor had become kind of increasingly closed off. My interaction was me and the laptop.
Oh,
and
yeah.
emails and maybe occasional phone calls, where now I'm in a space where I'm meeting people all day, every day, and in different roles, and again, whether I'm doing that advocacy work or whether I'm just meeting with members who have a concern, and how can we kind of help with with that, or even just in terms of some of the planning and the coordination around the events we do.
Oh, yeah. What was it like being a journalist? I like picture the comic books, right? Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Guy shows up, takes pictures, and then writes about it. Is that kind of like really what it's like, or is there a lot of time?
It's funny you mentioned the Spider-Man comics because that's what I grew up with, and so, but it wasn't like that. There were, I mean, at the end of the day, you're being paid to have conversations with people, to ask them a few questions about what they're doing or not doing, and then you write about it. And I very much was educated in that democracy. This is, of course, the benefit of a 4-year program that happens at the university in the national capital. Is my instructors very much told me that journalism in a free democratic society is an essential institution within that democracy, that you can't have an informed electorate without journalism.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And then that informed electorate then, right, elects the officials that will best represent their values and their interests. So that was my education, and certainly that was my approach as a reporter and as an editor, was feeling then that responsibility, that obligation to, right, the audience of whoever was reading my work, was that I'm trying to kind of give you the whole truthful story as much as I know it in that moment, because a news story is just like a news photography. It's a snapshot of a moment. It certainly doesn't right cover it all, but it gives a taste for what's going on. And then certainly really I had the opportunity in my career, particularly at the Citizen, of working with some great people on some award-winning work that really made a difference in the community, in terms of that it brought meaningful change in terms of, well, the one thing I'm thinking of, the Citizen won the Michener Award in 2007, which is a public service journalism award that's awarded annually by the Governor General.
Oh, no
The
kidding.
Citizen remains to this day the smallest news outlet in Canada to ever win
Wow.
the Michener. And so that was actually Gordon Hoekstra's work. He's a longtime reporter at the Vancouver Sun now, but when he was at the Citizen, there were a lot of truckers that were getting hurt and mostly being killed, because when you crash with a logging truck, chances are as a driver you die. And so there were a lot of deaths happening, mostly in the bush, and so he started looking into why is this happening and who's taking responsibility, and it turned out nobody was. Right? I mentioned ICBC earlier. They were like, well, that's happening those are happening on logging roads, not on public roads, so that's not really our problem.
Right.
The RCMP, well, that's not really, again, that's on work sites. And then WorkSafe was like, well, a logging site isn't really a work site. It's a work site, but they're on the road.
Yeah.
So, and then the forest companies were saying, well, they don't actually work for us, they're contractors. So nobody was taking responsibility.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so by the time Gord's series finished up, the provincial government was hired a forestry coroner and was spending $50 million working with logging companies to make logging roads safer.
Oh, yeah.
And so it went from, there was a period of time in the early 2000s where 40, 50 logging truck drivers a year were being killed in BC, and that went down to single digits within a few years. So to be involved in work that saved lives, that was pretty cool.
And that must have helped the civilian lives too, because like I've been on logging roads and they're sketchy places.
Yeah, you bet.
Yeah,
You
and
bet. And imagine how bad they were 20, 25, 30 years ago.
like the last time I was on a logging road was maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I couldn't imagine 20 years ago,
Right,
like
and,
without
and, right,
radios.
and you're right, and they're hauling, right, huge logs, loads that weigh multiple tons, and, yeah, and, the driving conditions, especially when it's raining or whatever, it can be pretty scary, pretty sketchy.
The roads are all gravel, they're all
Yeah.
uneven, they're single lane in a lot of places.
Yeah,
And then you got guys who just want to go camping or fishing, and they want to take that logging road out there,
Yeah.
and there's a logging truck driving 50K down it, and
yeah, yeah.
maybe not that fast. I'm not sure how fast they drive, but I
Yeah.
know that they get moving.
Yeah, oh, for
Yeah.
sure, for sure, for sure.
Oh.
So, yeah, so that's, that's certainly, to get back to your original question, just about the journalism piece, is
Oh,
that.
I do want to hear about. I
Yeah,
want to hear about that
is-
award.
is that was, again, just that obligation to the community that,
Mhm.
yes, I worked for, a boss and whatever, but that I felt that my obligation was to the community, and so it's, that's, I guess, how I was, my parents, especially my dad, when I was a kid growing up, my dad to this day remains a news junkie, and so I grew up with that. The news was important. The decisions that our political or our elected officials made was important.
Yeah.
And so then, okay, well, I want to do my part to inform other people
Mhm.
about what they're doing or not doing. And then, right, did that for a lot of years, as I said, almost 40, and then was like, okay, well, how else can I serve the community? And here I am at the chamber.
Yeah. Can you name some of those things that got put in place that made it safer? Because all I can really think about are radios, and I assume they were using radios for the last 50 or so years on logging roads.
There was quite a few changes that were brought in, a lot of them around the bridge construction, around over creeks, in terms of the width of those bridges, and then also the width of the roads themselves. Gord Hoekstra and actually went out with a citizen photographer on a couple of these day-longs where they would just go out into the bush, and they literally had like long measuring tapes measuring the width of roads.
Oh, yeah.
When they went to one site where there had been a big an accident where someone had died, they went out there and were, okay, well, which direction is this, and then found out, okay, well, they had improved, they had made the road safer, and they had put up a barricade, but it was on the wrong side of the road.
Oh, no.
So it was those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
so that oversight, making the roads a proper width, putting the bridges where they're supposed to go and at the proper width, and so, and obviously the grades and the approach and coming off the bridges as well, right, that it's safe.
Yeah.
And it was, radios was certainly part of it, but there was a lot of, and then also in terms of just even the length of time of the shifts for the drivers,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because even they drive out to the site, and then it's hurry up and wait.
Hmm.
And so then, okay, and now they're coming out and they're supposed to get their load to the mill. Well, how long have they been awake now?
Yeah.
16 hours, 18 hours, 20 hours?
Yeah.
And of course, that's not safe either.
No. So, as a journalist, were you going out to these locations and reporting on it?
So at the time, I was actually one of the editors. I wasn't the senior editor, but I was one of the editors. And so when Gord
yeah.
was doing the reporting on this work, and of course he was going through documents, and he's doing site visits, and he's talking to truckers and to the families of that have lost their truckers, and so really the issue that when you're doing that kind of work as a reporter is that you can pardon the pun, but you can sort of lose sight of the trees because all you can see is the forest.
Yeah.
Or vice versa, is you can just see trees, but you can't see the big picture. That's where editors really come in terms of helping reporters do that focusing. I mean, one of the things that I'm kind of most proud of, and I mean, Gord Hoekstra remains one of my closest friends to this day. One of the things I'm most proud of in terms of helping him with that project as one of his editors was he was writing about this process and the insurance and the difficulty for families to receive the insurance benefits that came from when they lost their spouse. And near the end of one of the stories, he talked about the spouse who went out to the site where her husband had died and finding his glasses in the snow.
Oh, man.
And so then I walked over to Gordon and I said, that doesn't belong at the bottom of the story.
Yeah.
That belongs at the top of the story.
Yeah.
Because we can talk about the process and all of that, but if you haven't engaged the reader, right, with their heart, then they're going to stick around to read about how complex the process is and all of that. But again, as a reporter, sometimes you get so mired in the process of wanting to explain it to the reader best you can that you kind of miss things like that. And so that's where I came to Gordon and I said, this is great. It's just in the wrong place, and let's move it up here.
Yeah.
The series was called Dying for Work. I came up with the name.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I'm still very proud of the fact I still have the piece of paper.
Yeah.
Gord didn't even know about the Michener Award. I left him a note and I said, you should nominate your series for this.
Oh, wow.
So then he nominates, and okay, he's a finalist, and he goes to Ottawa and with the senior editor at the time, and the Citizen was up against the CBC, the Toronto Star, like the big national media outlets, and then the two little ones were the Citizen and the Nunutziak News, the weekly in Iqaluit, that had done some work on climate change. And Gord goes off to Ottawa thinking, oh, we're never going to win this.
Oh, wow.
And then,
Nice.
lo and behold.
Yeah. Yeah, what you said about writing it to kind of resonate with the reader is something that's the most important thing I've probably learned from recording videos, is you get those statements that either pull on the heartstrings or make somebody realize something that they never realized before. And if you can be successful in that, you can change minds, you can change opinions,
Yeah.
You can... I just did some work for Spirit of the North Healthcare Foundation, and they had that evening in India, and they were raising funds for cardiac care.
Yeah.
And we had a few people come in, and they sat down and talked about their stories of, pacemakers and having a heart attack and stuff. And it was the moments where you really felt something for the person who was involved in it, that made a person think like, man, this could be me one day. Like, I'm going to step up. I'm going to donate some money. I'm going to support.
People around the world, doesn't matter where you're from, what culture you're from, we're motivated by stories, right? I mean, stories, right, affect us emotionally, and stories affect our worldview and can often then be the inspiration for us to take action.
Yeah.
And that was certainly the part that I enjoyed about being a journalist, was having access to really interesting people who gave me the privilege to tell their story, or in the case of some of the political work, or even talking about that forestry series that I was involved with, not so much as a writer on the editing standpoint, was just really kind of getting to some of the, I guess, the meatier issues, and really trying to right, understand, like, why are these things happening in the world, and why aren't we doing anything about it?
Yeah. You're executive director of the Chamber. You've got access to all these people in Prince George. You record podcasts. Why aren't you doing that? You can still be a journalist at the Chamber.
So really my role at the Chamber, right, is to just do what I can to help owner-operators like you, or small businesses, be successful. Being a journalist is to sometimes speak truth to power. There's still a role, certainly in the advocacy role with the chamber, to do some of that, but journalists do it far more aggressively.
I hear you.
Right, and so I'm quite proud of some of the stuff I did in my later career as the senior editor at the Citizen around, calling to attention the rather significant rise in wages amongst the non-union and senior staff at the City of Prince George in 2017, and then the cost overruns around the parkade, and working with Arthur Williams, the reporter at the time, to really try and uncover some of that, freedom of information requests to get documents, and that's the kind of stuff to do as a journalist, that as a chamber you're trying to be far more collaborative, where from a journalism standpoint, that's far, you're not collaborating at that point. It's actually adversarial.
Yeah,
Right, because you have powerful interests in administration and on the political side that would rather you not inform people about that.
Right. Do you want to talk about that parking lot? Because all I know is a little bit, and I probably read it from you.
Yeah, it was the George Street Parkade, which is here in Prince George, which was the public was informed that, okay, we're going to build this $12 million parkade that will be a companion to the housing development that's there, that's right across from City Hall. Actually, they're building the second phase of it right now, and so we're going to need this parkade, which will also, it will be used by these residents, but then the city will be able to use it as well for people working downtown, that they have off-street parking. And so we're going to work with the developer of the housing project, has been willing to take that on. It'll be $12 million. And then costs started escalating, and then it was 18, and then it was 22. And the final cost was, if I remember right, closer to about $34 million.
Oh, yeah.
So almost triple.
Yeah.
And that's all fine. I mean, cost overruns are not a great thing, especially when it's, of course, public dollars. The part that was particularly egregious was the efforts that were made to hide the cost overrun, both at the political and at the administrative level, to hide the cost overruns. So, some of the reasons for the cost overruns were actually very valid. I mean, once they started putting shovels in the ground and realizing that there was a lot of aging infrastructure, their electrical and plumbing and waterworks that had to be replaced. So some of it was actually quite legitimate. Probably should have been worked out before they gave set a budget for it. But at the same, I mean, some of it was legitimate. But again, the effort to paper it over.
Right.
That was certainly the part that certainly as a journalist, and then reporting it to the residents of Prince George, that was the egregious part, was that don't try and paper it over.
Yeah, and see, that's me asking. I want to know the why part. I want to know a little bit more about it. I've been in that parkade, and it's beautiful. If you ever need a place to park downtown, there's always space there, right? But it's one of those topics that you hear about, and then you always wonder, and it kind of just almost feels like it fades away over time, and people forget about it again. But
yeah, I mean that's the piece about journalism that I never wanted to be a historian. I never felt I needed to be a historian. When I was in high school, the chief anchor of CBC's The National in the 80s was Knowlton Nash, and he wrote a book called History on the Run. I actually received it for a graduation present when I knew I was going to university, and that's what Knowlton Nash argued, was that journalists are historians on the run. They're giving the first draft of history. That historians will come along later and be able to give a much broader context, and of course see it from more distant eyes, and we'll be able to see the different forces and why things happen, right? Where journalists in the moment, we're trying to do why, but really journalists only really have time for just the basics with maybe a little bit of context, a little bit of why.
Yeah.
But you're doing it on the run, and you're trying to finish one story and go on to the next. That's what journalists do. And so there's often not a lot of time for that reflection and that, okay, well, or if the reflection happens, it's why did I write it like that? Why didn't I ask this question? And more of that.
Yeah.
Why didn't I ask this person this question? I kind of let them off the hook, or whatever that looks like. So it's so like I said, that relationship with, particularly on the political side, is far more adversarial, where you're trying to get people to give you information that they don't want to give you.
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
And where I'm trying to work with not only business leaders, but also political leaders, in terms of, I want to work with you. I don't want to make your life difficult. You've already got these other things, and where we might have to come to you at times and advocate for the removal of barriers that are getting in the way of business people. But I'm not going to come at it as a journalist. I'm going to have a sit-down meeting with you and say, hey, could we talk about this?
Yeah.
Where a journalist would just write something and say, well, look at this horrible thing. It's a drain on the economy, and look at this business that has had to lay off employees. Well, I'm going to come into it with the chamber hat, with a far more, look at this happening. Like, I want to work with you to fix this problem.
I would love to see you do like a podcast with the chamber like that. I would love to see you just keep doing the journalism part, even if it's just once or twice.
The other thing, the other thing I've found since joining the chamber, people talk to me more now because I'm not a journalist.
Well, I'm not saying to be a journalist. I'm saying,
Right.
but you already have that experience to bring the conversation out of people, and maybe pushing a couple topics is good for somebody. Like, if you were to ask me about this place and you pushed me on a few topics, it would probably get me to realize kind of like, what I'm doing is maybe I should go in a different direction. Maybe I could pursue a different avenue.
I suppose I do that already a little bit, in that I host a weekly radio show on CFIS. I host it Tuesday after 9, and I try and keep that radio show from 9 to 10 every Tuesday. I try and keep that radio show quite business focused, and a business / economic focus locally. But I've certainly had on guests over the last few months. We've talked about tariffs and interprovincial trade and all of that stuff, and so I guess I've tried to have on guests who maybe provide some of that context in a talk radio format.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's 93.1?
Yep.
CFIS? Yeah. So I know Alan there. I met with him just this yesterday morning? Can't remember now. But yeah, he interviewed me, and we sat and talked for 15 minutes, and that was fun. My first time being live on the radio. So I'll have to check out your show and see what
It's
about.
on their website, so right, they post the shows. So it's we had on Colleen and Chrissy from the downtown Prince George, from the Business Improvement Association.
I don't
this
know
past
them.
week. So
I don't know them. I should talk to them. Yeah.
yeah, so they really
Okay.
focus on downtown, but again, same thing is right. We're both of business associations, but we certainly we might have different approaches on some things, but at the end of the day, we're both trying to encourage positive business activity. So there's a lot of collaboration between our groups.
Right. And you work closely with PG Community Foundation as well, Peter.
We actually share office space with them.
Yeah.
Right now on 7th Avenue. So yeah, and that one works well with me because as an individual, I have my own fund at the community foundation. So I'm
Yeah. It's a good group of people there
Yeah.
too.
yeah, for sure.
That's one thing I find with Prince George. It's not a big enough city that people keep away, you know, it's like everybody's still really close together.
It's a big, small town.
Yeah, a big small town. That's a good explanation. Yeah, it's yeah, a good group of people that are kind of always willing to help. You know,
Yeah.
and work closely, like Community Foundation, the Chamber of Commerce, Spirit of the North is another one. I love that organization, and I've only recently started working with them, and the work that they do, I find is super important. That's something, you know, I could need cardiac care at some point in the future, right? You don't know. It could be genetics, and it could be, you know, history, could be food, could be all sorts of different things, and there's no way to kind of know for sure if you're going to have heart problems or not.
And we've certainly learned in the history of Prince George in the last 25, 30 years that if we don't, as Prince George and as regional residents, advocate for our healthcare interests,
Yeah.
that Victoria won't necessarily be all that responsive, and so we really have to work hard, right? We had a
Yeah.
huge doctor's shortage here in the late 90s and early 2000s, and you know, we filled CN Center. It was still called the Multiplex at the time, but 6,000 people came out to
Wow.
a healthcare rally.
Wow.
6,000 people
Yeah.
came out to a healthcare rally. The result of that, right? That's how you make politicians in your provincial capital pay attention. 6,000 people came out in Prince George for a healthcare rally. The result was the Northern Medical Program, right? Our right at UNBC, right? Let's train doctors. If we train them in the north, they'll be far more likely to live and work here. And so Prince George and the region is beneficiary of that to this day. So that's where then that led to Spirit of the North, right? Is realizing that, and that gets back to that sense of community and community building, and when we work together,
Yeah.
good things happen.
Yeah, totally. Well, Neil, it's a great conversation. We've been talking for an hour.
And time has flown by.
Yeah. Sir? What? Oh, thank you. Oh my gosh.
On here, I thought I was off the hook.
I do not.
Because
need
I
to
wasn't
ask you
going to
about
bring
this.
it up.
No. Do you want to be off the hook for it?
No, it's fine.
Okay.
The books are out of print, so it's not like you can go to a bookstore
Oh, really?
and get it.
Oh,
But
man.
I'm happy to speak to it, and I have enough. I could bring you the trilogy. I have about, I think, about 7 or 8 copies of each book left, so I could.
Can I read it? Yeah.
So I could certainly
Okay.
kind of give you since it sounds like you have a young reader.
Yeah.
Because
Who would love
that was
yeah.
the reason I wrote it was, and I can talk about that if you want to talk about it.
Okay, so just a quick introduction. You wrote a trilogy, and it's a young adult fantasy era. I'm not familiar.
My daughter was born in 1996, so right around, I guess, 2007, 2008, right, as a young reader herself, she really fell for the Twilight books, and so right, as a curious dad, I was, what's all this fuss about Twilight? What's all this? Edward and what's her name again? Oh, I can't remember. Anyway, what's all the fuss about with these kinds of books? And so I read the series, and they're page turners, well written books. Except that I got to the end, and I was like, I think I could do better.
Oh yeah.
But I looked at it as better, and not necessarily writing them better, but as a dad raising a daughter, I wasn't very pleased with the message of Twilight, right? And of course now I've remembered the female lead's name, Bella. I was not happy with this very traditional, Bella's helpless and save me, Edward. That didn't make me very happy, right? I'm trying to raise a young, strong daughter in a modern world. And right, those very traditional gender, right, that, you know, the damsel in distress and the powerful male character in this case who happens to be a vampire that's been living for hundreds of years, and just the power dynamic just seemed very unequal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just started with a very simple premise of like, okay, I'm going to write a young adult fantasy novel of my own for an audience of one, my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to reverse the gender roles. And okay, well, I'm not going to use vampires. That's a little too obvious. So I kind of made up some creatures of my own that are eternal. And you mentioned comic books earlier. I kind of wanted that whole Marvel Comics. The future of the universe is at stake, right? I wanted kind of that big, ambitious. But I reversed it, where it was right. The lead male character was 17 years old and a bit of a bumbling nerd, probably based on this guy at that time. But the teenage character he meets is a guardian of the universe who's hiding from the other guardians because she's done something kind of bad. And the other guardians aren't very happy about it, and they're looking for her, but she's hiding out on Earth as a human and doing very human things like going to high school.
Okay.
And so right then there's that kind of falling in, and then of course, romance starts, but then things happen, and so then everything goes off the rails, and so it's much like Twilight, right? There's he becomes aware of right, this guardian world and what's happening, and gets embroiled in it, and so right. But again, it really just started. So I wrote it over the period of about 9 or 10 months, just a first draft, and I gave it to my daughter, and she read it in 2 days, and was, Dad, this is her exact words. And again, she was 11 or 12. This is good enough to be in the library. And I was like, oh, well, okay. So I spent another 3-4 months kind of cleaning it up and revising it, and then I started shopping it around, and I got the rejection letters, and nothing really happened. And then I heard that there was actually a science fiction fantasy publishing house here in Prince George that hadn't even approached. I was approaching Canadian and American publishing houses, large and small, and getting the rejection letters. I was also trying to get an agent, because you can't get into the bigger publishing houses without an agent. I got some agents that, okay, they were interested, send me the entire manuscript, and then, oh, sorry, no thanks, right? Because you kind of go through the audition process. But then I sent it to Bundoran Press. It's no longer here in Prince George, but there was, like I said, a small sci-fi fantasy publishing house here in Prince George. So I sent it off, and about 4 months later, just randomly, I got a call. Hey, we really like this, and can we talk? Because we'd like to publish it. What? And we'll pay you. Right? And okay. So then we got down that road, and then of course I just sold the first one, and they were like, "Is there more?"
Oh yeah.
Well, of course I lied. Of course there's more. There's a whole trilogy, in fact. There was no trilogy. Did I have, as an outline, did I have fuller backstory and a bit of a future like development of it? Yeah, so that I could place the characters in the first novel within a period of time.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a full trilogy, and so the second and third books I had to write over a period of about 18 months.
Oh wow.
So that was a pretty intense 18 months.
Yeah.
And I ended up writing the two of them simultaneously,
Oh, yeah.
where I had outlines for the two, and I wrote the second one pretty much straight up. but then as I'm writing the third one, I'm going back to the second one. These two things have to connect, and
Right.
yeah. So,
What is it? What is it called?
So it's called the Broken Guardian trilogy, and so the first book is. This has been a while. You're putting me on the spot a little bit. Disintegrate, dissolve, and resolve is the third one.
Neat.
And so then as part of it, my publisher, Virginia O'Dine, who is still here in Prince George, she sold the publishing house, but still lives here in Prince George. And if the O'Dine name rings a bell,
Marietta.
she is the mother of Marietta, our
Yeah, yeah.
Olympic double bronze medalist.
Yeah.
But Virginia said, okay, well, I'm publishing these books. You have to come to these conventions with me. So I went to When Worlds Collide in Calgary, and I went to World Fantasy with her in Toronto. And so some of these things, right, where you kind of hawk your books and you meet other writers, and so then I was quite shocked that the second and third books of the trilogy were nominated for Aurora Awards, which so they were
Wow.
both of those books were nominated for best teen sci-fi fantasy novel of the year.
Wow.
And I was up against the one year I was up against Kelly Armstrong. Well, her books are on the New York Times bestsellers list. I mean, she is like the Canadian teen fantasy writer.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, she churns out 2 books a year, and she's Stephen King in the teen fantasy space. And then there's me from Prince George with my little book in my little trilogy. So it was just thrilling to be nominated.
Yeah. Well, that's super cool. Yeah. I'm looking forward to having my daughter check it out, and I'll let you know what she thinks. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Neil.
Okay,
Great to have you again.
thank you.
And yeah.
I'll rustle up those books. They're probably gathering too much dust on the back corner of a bookshelf. But yeah, I don't talk about those. Not a lot of people bring those up anymore. That was kind of
Yeah. Well,
back then, and yeah.
like I said, I actually found it. I only found out about it because I had these topics about you, and then I was like, oh, I'll go on to AI and I'll say like, create a bio on Neil and give me some more information about him. And it said he wrote a novel, and that was just this morning. So that's awesome.
Yeah, that was. Yeah, I bring that up from